Hi, my name is Sam, and I'm a fully recovered Rolex Steel Sports addict. Recovering Rolex Steel Sports addict. Rolex Steel Sports addict. Welcome to the Black Dial. Let's go. Now, on this third ever episode of the Black Dial, we're going to touch a little bit on my origin story as a watch collector, specifically as it pertains to Rolex. We'll touch on the non-Rolex watches that actually got me into the hobby, then the transitional pieces as my taste started to shift, and finally today, talk about my most recent watch purchase, which is hiding in here, and you might have guessed it's a
Rolex, please!
Dear God, what the is that?
It's Archibald Chesterfield the Third!
Arch, what are you doing here, man? This is one of the first ever episodes for my channel. I'm not sure if I want to be associated with...
You ingrateful son of a bitch!
That's harsh.
Without me, no wristwatch check! Without me, the world is still buying shaters from micro brands who cut out the middleman. Without me, Rodent One takes over the world. Without me... you'll never learn that watch collecting sometimes needs to hurt!
He's not wrong, and honestly, having stretch goals for your watch collection isn't the worst thing ever. In fact, it's kind of a must in my opinion. It's a great way to keep the hobby fun and aspirational, and allows you to go down rabbit holes that you probably have no business going down, but are super interesting and enriching, and learning about those little rabbit holes are what makes this hobby so friggin' cool. That said, this is still kind of a tough episode to make because I've got to answer a question. Am I driven in my collector's journey by the things that truly excite me personally? Or am I driven a little bit by the general hype cycle that's driving Rolex and other specific pieces from other specific sort of, maybe not holy trinity, right? But sort of the core stalwarts of the watch industry? To answer that, I really got to go, I think, all the way back to the beginning of my watch journey, to be honest with you. Or at least back to the first time that I was introduced to the wonderful world of Rolex. The first time I ever walked into a Rolex AD, the hype cycle was already full swing, right? This is probably going back 3.5-ish years ago, somewhere around that time. And quite frankly, it was already difficult to get a Rolex sports watch. I ended up starting a conversation with the gentleman who at the time I didn't realize was actually the owner of that family-owned AD within the city that I live. We kind of bantered back and forth about the current state of the industry. I shared obviously my passion for Omega at the time, which was the kind of high hot horology brand that I owned and was kind of able to afford. And then we also talked, of course, about how crazy Rolex had become over time and the specific models that excited me in both brands. This was topical because they were an AD for both Omega and Rolex. It was really kind of the first time that I have ever interacted with somebody in real life who was as much of, I think, a true horology fan as I was. From that perspective, the AD visit was a resounding success and an experience that I thought that you may not be able to get anywhere else, to be completely honest with you. So the conversation eventually turns to what it is that I'm looking for that day. And I was candid. I told him I'm probably like everybody else that you see walk through these doors. I'm excited by, infatuated by the Rolex sports pieces that are at this point effectively unobtainium. That said, I was at my core very much just a watch fan and excited to be in the building and kind of see what they had on display. At the time was obviously a ton of precious metal stuff that moves kind of slow. I think there might have been a two-tone Daytona in the case, which I commented, I thought that was crazy that they would even have something like that on display. But just kind of cards up, letting him know what I was interested in, what I was looking for. So he pauses for a moment and says, hold that thought. I got something that might be exciting for you. Just a moment later, he comes back out, presentation gloves on, the iconic, I guess, Rolex green box, the small one, which means there's something stainless in there, and I think just as exciting as when you would pull out a giant box to denote the precious metal. And he slowly opens this thing. There it is in all its glory. A deep sea 50th anniversary red letter Sea Dweller. And this thing was breathtaking. I mean, honest to God, for me at that stage of my collection journey, I had never seen anything like this. Now, I know folks are going to say, well, wait till you see a Nate Langenzona or a Patek. I've actually seen all those models now, thanks to some traveling kind of around the world that led me to some incredible secondhand dealer shops, specifically one in Sweden that was just an absolute, horology nerd's dream in terms of having every hype piece that you could possibly manage kind of at your fingertips and available to try on and the rest of it. But at the time, that was by far the most impressive piece of timekeeping that I had ever seen in the flesh and had a chance to actually put on my wrist. Now, at this point, I gotta pause for a moment. As a watch enthusiast, I think you're kind of lying to yourself if you don't have at least some reference for Rolex as a brand. Provenance is undeniable. And what might even be more undeniable than that is the way in which that billion-dollar marketing budget has influenced your feeling about it. I think a lot of people will claim, oh, I absolutely hate it, want nothing to do with it. But let's be honest, if it was readily available and within reach, you'd probably go seek it out because it's a damn fine watch, right? All right, so back to the AD. Believe it or not, I actually passed on the SD43. And this was for two really specific reasons. Reason one, it actually felt kind of a little bit big on the wrist, and I don't have small wrists by any stretch of the imagination. Probably somewhere around a 7.5 on a good day, maybe just a touch over that on a hot and sweaty and swollen wrist type of day. That sounded super freaking weird. And then the second reason was I just really wasn't financially ready to make the plunge. I think for me at that stage of my journey, while I probably could have stretched for it, the idea of dropping that type of coin on a timepiece, at that point, right, the most I'd ever spent was just around $3,900, $4,000 for a steal that I got on a Speedmaster 007 that I wish I had kept, because now those things are trading well into the mid fours. And I think more than just for the investment perspective of watchmaking, which I have a ton of issue with. That watch is iconic. It's a Speedmaster that I truly do want to own at some point for the long haul, and it's kind of a permanent staple within my collection. So that was a mistake to get rid of that one. But anyway, long story short, at that time, dropping 5 figures on a watch still wasn't something I was comfortable with, even though I was kind of starting to wade into those waters. And I think eventually, obviously, get to a place where I could wrap my mind around that concept. The story doesn't end there. The second time I walk in there, link up with the same guy, have a great conversation, again, kind of around the latest releases that are coming out. I forget if there was an event, whether it was Basel World or something else that was kind of taking place. And again, we kind of get back around to what are you gunning for, right? What are you looking for again? I said, you know what, after a ton of thinking, and even passing on the SC43 was probably a mistake, and if I had another chance to shoot at it, I probably would close the deal this time around. But I've really been thinking about an Explorer 2. Still over 40 mil, so fits the wrist really nicely. And it's not one that you see every day, right? I don't think it's as desired kind of within the wonderful world of Rolex sports models, but to me it's unique. GMT function, super rugged, 24-hour bezel. And he goes, white or black dial? And I said, black dial. He goes, hold that thought. Comes back with the iconic small green box, and inside, you guessed it, right? The orange-handed Explorer 2, absolutely jaw-dropping, absolutely stunning, fully stickered, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And at that point, obviously, there was no saying no. That thing had to come home with me. And to this day, it's a core part of my collection and a watch that I derive great joy from. I travel the world with that watch on. I've had a TSA or whatever the equivalent is at Charles de Gaulle Airport throw it into a bin carelessly. I don't know how that happened. You ever have something happen to your watch where you're like, why is this happening? But it's too late, it already happened. That's what that experience was like. It was awful. At any rate, that was my first entry point into the wonderful world of Rolex. And I got to tell you, from there, it kind of spiraled out of control. So the problem really didn't start for a few weeks after that purchase. And it's when I started to try to rotate back into the other watches that were in my collection. None of them compared. Seiko 007, nope. Orient Sun and Moon, I think I had one of those at the time. Obviously, nope. Even a Seamaster 300, the Bond one. I put it on a beautiful Uncle Seiko waffle strap. Nope, that wasn't doing it. The Speedmaster that I had mentioned, nope. And quite frankly, I was thinking, well, shit, it's not really responsible to have this amount of money invested in watches. I probably should move that, offset a little bit of the money that I put into for this thing, that type of thing. Started to rationalize the rotation a little bit from that perspective. And what else did I have at the time? Oh yeah, Pelagos. And even that, which I truly still believe, and I said this in one of my earlier videos, is the best dive watch under $5,000. Omega B Dan right on that point. I think that watch truly punches very, very much above its weight. And I think it's a watch that Tudor may never engineer something as, I guess, forward-leaning from a thought perspective. If you think about the clasp on that, just the way the D10 stops at 12 o'clock, all these different things. That's a watch that's in my collection forever, no question. I talked to a couple of you folks about that. At any rate, everything just seemed to pale in comparison to that beautiful black dial Explorer 2 on an Oyster bracelet. What was happening to me? Had the Rolex marketing machine really seeped into my brain and made me believe that it was the best or nothing less? Is that one of the marketing phrases? I'm not even sure. I started thinking about kind of what comes next for me. Had the Seamaster, love always having a diver in the collection. Had the Pelagos, love always having a diver in the collection. But the truth is, I became obsessed with having to seek out a ceramic 6-digit diver from Rolex. But not just any 6-digit diver from Rolex, because while I loved the journey that I was beginning to take with this brand, I also didn't want to be right on the nose and get a Submariner, maybe a no-date sub. So I started kind of chasing that with the same AD. Nothing doing. Kind of felt like at that point, I had been given this entry into the wild world of Rolex. They'd offered me 2 watches. They let me have one. And for now, that was the only taste that I was going to get, at least for the foreseeable future. So naturally, I start to turn to the gray market. And in turning to the gray market and kind of looking at what's out there in the landscape of Rolex divers, I think every one of you that starts to consider the Submariner, the Sea Dweller, then looks at the 5-digit references, etc., gets to a place where we're going to come across the wonderful, the beautiful, the venerable SD 4K 116600. The last of the, what is it? The last of the no Cyclops Sea Dwellers. You guessed it, I become obsessed with searching that watch on the secondary market from a gray dealer because, of course, as we know, it only ran for 3 years, 2014 to 2017, as close to still in warranty as humanly possible. I think at some point I was chasing kind of for them, some from private sellers, some from more established gray market dealers, right? We all know kind of the usual suspects that are out there. While I was searching this, I almost got ripped off. I almost got ripped off from a guy who clearly actually had the watch but was baiting it out there and then trying to run some sort of a wire fraud scam. Luckily, smartened up to that, didn't go through with the deal, and then became kind of gun shy about searching out a savings of $500-600 by trying to go direct to an end consumer who had this watch and was trying to directly deal it. I end up with Crown and Caliber. And this isn't a video about my experience with Crown and Caliber. We'll get there. I guess I'll leave it at it wasn't perfect. Anyway, when this watch showed up, I should call it partial box and papers. Certainly wasn't complete box and papers as it was listed, but partial box and papers. It was still friggin' amazing, man. And the same experience, I think, happened all over again, right? The dopamine rush of opening a box, or in this case, they send it out in this really cool watch roll. They have it all stickered up in kind of a nice way that they do these secondary market watches. It has this little sticker on the back that if you tamper with it, you can't return it, just in case you try to open the movement or do something funny, right? And then send it back to them and call it a fugazi after you've damaged it. But at any rate, this thing comes, it's super clean, it's super impressive. It's a 2017, it's from my birth month. Not that that's of significance, right? This is like the kind of crazy shit I think that watch nerds do, is try to attribute different things to watches to make them mean more than they probably should. And again, fall in love all over again with the brand. All over again with the brand. And you might say, Sam, was this the end of it? Did you get your fix? Can't say I did, because now the Crown became all I cared about as far as watch collecting was concerned. And then I became obsessed with this concept of having a trio. Land, explorer, I guess cave dwelling, whatever, right? Sea in the Sea Dweller, of course. And then I needed air. I needed a GMT. Had to get a 6-digit ceramic GMT. Had to do it. Had to do it. It was only natural. You gotta have a trio, right? Because you can't have 2 Rolexes that only cover you in 2 forms of, I guess, terrestrial atmosphere, right? You gotta have all 3 covered. You gotta do it. It would just be ludicrous not to. Another gray market purchase, 2-tone root beer. What can I say about this watch? It is freaking Sick. Thing slaps. Thing absolutely slaps. It might even have some QC issues, which I feel like all GNTs do, right? Like the bezel is slightly off, doesn't line up quite perfectly. It's a little mushy for what it is, but the lines, the elegance, the word clean just comes to mind so much when I think about Rolex, man. The clean aesthetic of this watch is unmatched. And there it was, the trio, the holy trinity of terrestrial travel. I don't know. Whatever it was, right? We had air covered, two-tone GMT. We had sea covered SD4K, and we had land covered and spelunking covered and mountain climbing covered in the Explorer 2. All things that I don't do. So at this point in my journey, I'm near junkie levels of addiction to the Rolex watch brand, and I don't seem to be slowing down in any way, shape, or form, but a watershed moment kind of happens for me. And this is where I kind of take a stand. As feeble as that stand might be, an event happens that makes me start to second guess all this love of Rolex. A innocent enough conversation with my brother-in-law. He reaches out and asks if I have any suggestions for him about watches that would fit two specific criteria, right? Either one that attaches to his Italian or Swedish heritage, or one that attaches to kind of a watershed moment that he has in high school, where Movado was the watch du jour that signified success, specifically with some asshat who rolled around in a late model BMW convertible and wore one of these Movados on his wrist. I'll leave the kid's nickname out of this just in case. But at any rate, kind of knocked me back a bit, because here was a guy who was just wading into the world of horology. My wife and I had purchased him kind of a mid-range dive watch to kind of get his feet wet for a milestone birthday of his. And here he was trying to wade further into the waters and attach and ascribe value to certain pieces that would mean something to him every time he looked down at them. And he ends up with, I think it's called a Tusano, which is a Swedish brand that makes actually some pretty cool dive watches that I think are somewhat inspired. I think the one he got is a little bit inspired by the Black Bay. And they've got some other watches that I think are a little bit more unique to their own design aesthetic. But at any rate, it's a quality watch, got a decent movement in it, and it looks cool as shit. And guess what? He loves the thing. Loves the thing. Went out, found it on his own, did a bunch of research on it, pulled the trigger, looks down at it. It reminds him of, whatever it reminds him of. But it's a further step into the wonderful world of horology. And it's so pure. And I think that, for me, forced me to stop and think. Now, keep in mind, of course, he does have some stretch goals. He'd love to have Tony Soprano's solid gold day date 36, I think it is, as kind of a milestone watch, because that's a show that he grew up watching with his father, and that has some value and meaning to him as well in it. A solid gold piece, it's a nice stretch goal to have as he continues on in his career and his love and journey within watch. I think that brings up the point that the journey should be singular to you, should be singular to me. I should be chasing things that bring me joy for whatever reasons they bring me joy. And to that end, that's why I'm wearing this watch today. This is a Hamilton Field khaki automatic with the blue dial. I mean, it's not cheap by any means, right? $500 or thereabouts, plus a few bucks for the strap on top of it. It's a joy to look at. It's blue, and don't we know that blue is all the rage these days? Let's see if we can make this thing catch a focal point. It's just a cool watch. That's all it is. See-through case back, all sorts of good shit going on, right? You can enjoy this. You didn't spend 5 figures on it. It's freaking cool. But after all, right, I did say that I was a Rolex Steel Sports addict. And guess what Rolex Steel Sports addicts do when they get the call? They answer it. They always can answer it. Almost for whatever might be on the other end. And if it was on the list, that arbitrary, ridiculous list that you've drawn up in your head of things that you would love from the Rolex line, then you sure are grabbing the Amex as fast as humanly possible and rushing down there to grab it. So that brings us to the latest addition to this Rolex Addicts collection, which, like I said, is hiding in this 1111 travel watch case. I am not sponsored by them, but this thing's kind of sick. I might do a review on it at some point. Also, 1111, if you're watching, hook your boy up with the bigger one, because that thing looks cool too. But here it is. We'll give it a quick wipe down. It's been kind of an Easter egg in other videos of mine, so if you've caught it kind of in passing, then you knew this was coming. But yeah, El Batman, right? So let's try to tap on this thing, get it to focus up real good. There it is. There it is in all its glory. So for me, this is the first Rolex that I own with the Jubilee bracelet. And it is, you guessed it, friggin' clean. It's just awesome, man. I feel like the bezel action on these could be a little bit less springy and more snappy. I don't know if that's a design. Maybe someone out there can kind of correct me on the reasoning behind that. But yeah, man, this watch, amazing. Had to add it. Has no rhyme or reason. Doesn't fit anywhere in that trio of air, land, and sea except more air, I guess. Because at this point, we're just reaching for reasons that... But yeah, that's where I'm at, man. I think in truth, so I bought that watch a little while ago now, but obviously revealing it now to the greater channel audience. And I actually bought this Hamilton after the fact because for me, this is a watch that I think I'm kind of equally excited about. I'm not being facetious, man. Because for me, and I had talked about this with a watch colleague of mine now that I've joined a group of watch enthusiasts that kind of hold this same reverence for these things as I do. This watch represents a return for me. And what I mean by that is a return to kind of a purity about watch collecting, where it doesn't have to be insane dollar amounts that are attached to these trinkets. With that said, that's the journey of how Rolex ruined my watch collecting. But then in some ways, it's also the way in which Rolex forced me to have to rethink what watch collecting is. And for that, I guess I'm grateful too. I'll be waiting for the call. This is the Black Dial. Thanks for watching.